every other day, sometimes I really do just want to throw in the towel and give up because I don't know that it's worth it. And it just seems like everything I uncover, it just gets worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, to me, I'm still going through that period of having my expectations blown away. And you told me what I would be getting into, and to this extent, to a certain extent, I still haven't seen half of it because I'm not active on social media the way that you are. But from what we get every single day, people telling their stories, I wasn't prepared for how bad that is. But I think I still frame that as I'm realizing how bad the problem is, not that it's impossible to make a difference. But as that problem gets bigger and bigger, you start wondering how in the hell can we ever chip away at this thing?
Yeah, and I think just the nature of speaking out against it and so many people, it's just like being involved in politics where you have so much infighting within the
Oh
movement
yeah.
and then so much risk of, because it's really dawned on me that there's no way I can go back into practicing law in Louisville family, not that I would want to, but just the retaliation from any clients or anything like that. Like we've really put ourselves out there and seeing how big and systemic and systematic these problems are, it's hard for me to hold.
Yeah, I agree. And the problems in other places being so different than they are where we practiced. So, right before we went on recording, we were talking about potential legislative changes that would solve some of the problems that we see here locally. And they wouldn't be a drop in the bucket or even start to address some of the issues we've heard about in other courts, for instance.
Yep.
So I know that it's much easier to talk about the areas where we know and where I think the problems are vast but still finite. I can define what they are. I still don't have my head around what's going on in some other places, and that's one of the things that's really daunting.
Yeah, and I think too, like, I didn't have my head around about how bad it was in Louisville until I was away from it more at the same time. Like, I do
Hmm.
think Louisville is in a much worse situation than what you may think it is. I mean, and I could be wrong. I'm open to the fact that I'm wrong, but I just see these patterns over and over and over in the messages. But since we started recording about what, I mean, maybe an hour and a half ago, Ohio, Georgia, California, please come, United Kingdom, it's the same thing. It's the lack of transparency, the lack of efficiency, and the delegation to these third party
Yeah.
people, GALs or their equivalent or custodial evaluators. And I don't know how to stop it. And I don't know what's going to happen to these children that are involved in the system.
No, I agree. My biggest fear is that what we're doing may, in the short term, make things worse if
Yep.
the reaction that we've had here continues in the direction that it's going. So
Hmm.
we know that there's been discussions on shutting the public out of family court hearings or not letting people attend certain things. And I think that will have the opposite effect of, I think there's less transparency and the problems that already exist are just going to fester and get 10 times worse without anyone being able to witness what's going on. And I
Yeah.
worry that us shining a light on these problems, instead of actually fixing the problems, those that are in charge are just going to try to keep us from shining a light on the problem. And just,
Yep.
that initial knee jerk defensiveness that we've seen out of the court system scares me a little bit.
Yeah, and the fact that lawyers are so adamantly protecting the system, but I think it was designed like this, like GALs, FOCs, they are protecting their income. And then you have big firms that are protecting the custodial evaluators and they get more and more and more money. I mean, there is a profit margin when you're running a business. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be. Okay. There absolutely should be. Like, there has to be a way for lawyers to pay their mortgage. They have to make money. But I think the system has gotten so big, and I do think that there's a bigger problem in Louisville, like the shooting the shit at motion hours and the shooting the shit with other attorneys, local attorneys about the problems. I think that's dying off. You have a lot of these young attorneys that really think the system is working.
Yeah, I think that it takes time for you to realize, when it fails. You see it going. You've been taught this is the system. I mean, imagine if you've practiced under someone or been mentored by someone or taken the family law class that taught by, someone within the system right now. This is what you're expecting. So I think that the expectations of people,
True.
younger attorneys that are coming into family law, it's meeting their expectations. And I think that it will take a case where they have a client who
Hmm.
loses their child or is wronged in a terrible way for them to think through, wait a second, how in the world in the United States could that have just happened? I got denied a hearing and she's, he or she is, having to give up their child today without any real due process. I think when that happens, it changes. I mean, it changed you, it changed me. I remember the first time that that happened and it just exposed so many of the problems, and that was years into my career. So,
Yeah, and I think too, just the notion of not understanding that you can buck the system. Like, I do think I know I'm indoctrinated in certain ways because I still am like very much, oh, well, the system will work, the system will work.
yeah.
But I do think there's just like a fundamental misunderstanding of the due process requirements. Like the fact that every Louisville lawyer has not been like, open up courtrooms immediately and we're not waiving due process rights is insane to me. It's insane to me, and I think the number of attorneys that are supportive of what we are doing publicly is kinda going by the wayside.
Hmm. When I speak to people, it's always people agreeing or, talking about, I'm glad you're bringing light to this. And I'm less involved on social media, so I don't see the other side as much. I don't see
No,
the
they're all
pushback.
kissing our ass.
The pushback
Yes.
that I see, a lot of the pushback I see comes from infighting within, people that are interested in judicial reform from one way or the other that is, I think, extremely counterproductive, but also completely uninteresting to me. So I try to tune it out, but I also realize the effect that it has. And it really keeps us from actually getting any meaningful change done. Whereas those who are trying to do things from a political point of view automatically have people that are built in support of their position from their political side and can be very effective at moving things in the wrong direction.
Yep.
And again, not that one side is wrong or right, but that politicizing the judiciary is a problem regardless of which way that it comes. And I think part of why you say you're indoctrinated, I don't know that you're indoctrinated. We're both attorneys. We trained and became attorneys because we believe in the power of law. We believe in this third branch of the government and its role. And you go through a lot of cost and a lot of school to enter into that world. Maybe it's indoctrination, but it's sort of something the country is founded on. So I mean, it's a belief, and I think that's what drives us being appalled by, the way that the system is being executed.
I think the indoctrination that I'm talking about, the notion that, like, attorneys can fix everything or that judges are kind of on the up and up or that the system is gonna survive, and what I mean by that, like, if you look at the most successful litigators at the Supreme Court, it's my understanding that they are jailhouse lawyers, right? They have got a lot of published cases. So these are pleadings and law that's been created through the judiciary, not by attorneys, but by people that were affected by the system that preserved the issues that got it up to the higher courts. And I think just like we see within the medical industry, massive changes within the medical industry in the last 20 to 30 years with insurance companies and things like that. Do you know what I mean? Just how their day to day functions are done. And I don't see lawyers realizing their own autonomy within the system and being more players in the system, if that made sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something that goes on outside of the problems that we talk about with judicial reform, in as much as big change I saw over the course of my career is that lawyers weren't allowed to really run a business like anybody else for a long time. They
Mhm.
were overregulated. You couldn't make a blog post without getting pre-approval and paying $80 to the bar to give you the thumbs up to post it. So if you posted about something that was actually going on, by the time it got approved, it would be irrelevant anyway. And you weren't
Yeah.
allowed to do anything but hang your shingle with your name on it, no advertising, that kind of stuff. Attorneys are now finally being recognized as business people and regulated like people that can actually promote themselves and do business. And I think that that is I mean, there's a that factors into the way that attorneys treat the system, and it could have some unintended consequences because we're talking about it as a means to an end, which it always was. You didn't go into the law to not make a living. I mean, it's,
Hmm.
people don't say they want their kids to become lawyers and doctors because you don't make any money. But I mean, it has changed the way that people think about the system. Whereas before, here's the role of the attorney, you're regulated into this role. You were told that you have to be only do X, Y, and Z. And now you have more freedom to look at the whole thing as a system and a way to make money and to play your role within the system. And maybe you go along with all of these things because you can get more appointments. It,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that that's going on behind the scenes. And I think that there may be financial interests that aren't necessarily like consciously at odds with sort of what we're taught our role really is as an attorney or what it should be. But I think, in the background, that stuff is changing the practice as well.
Yeah, I just think that it's like big picture. I don't know what the answer is because there's so much like infighting. And then we have these like high level conversations where it's, yes, how when I used to practice, this is what was happening when I
Yeah.
used to practice. But I do genuinely believe if we don't make massive, and I mean massive changes in the next year or two, like the system is in real trouble. And I've said this before, like I have so many success stories from criminal court where getting caught up in the criminal court system helped people. Like they got clean. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They got their kids back. I don't know any story like that from family court. And we're going to see kids that had two lawyers appointed to them go to high school. I mean, I was reading something the other day and it was like talking about, oh, let's talk about this. So, like, when we talked to Josh out of Orange County, he said, my kids are not getting the same parent that my older child got because I'm so concerned with what the court's going to do.
Sure.
And I talked to my parents, like, obviously I'm visiting family, and I talked to them about some of the crazy, funny things that happened, when we were kids or something like that. And it's if you were in family court and you had a GAL that heard some of the stories that happened in the 80s, they would have been like, oh, everybody in therapy. And
Yeah.
it would
Everybody's
have
abused their
destroyed the family.
kids. Yeah.
I mean, if you would have been at this is the other side of my family, but NFL Sunday, if some of these GALs, especially the GALs that don't have kids that are super quote unquote, you know, progressive, not in a negative way, if they heard the way that they talked during the Colts game, I mean, I'd have been in foster care.
Well, I mean, I think it's funny. Go watch 1980s PSAs and you realize that, things that were a regular part of parenting and growing up would be abuse and neglect now. Like, what is it? It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your kids are? That PSA, it's like nowadays you'd never have your kids just out unaccounted for roaming the neighborhood. Back then you could. I did. I knew what time I had to be back and I could just go miles away to friends' houses and do that kind of stuff. And life was a little bit different. I find that funny to think about sometimes. But when I was practicing, I told every single client that had kids, just imagine there's cameras in each room. And I was very honest with them. And I said, I know that sounds miserable. And I imagine it is. I would hate that with every ounce of my being. And it would change the way that I was with my kids and it would ruin a lot of things. So I know what you're going to say, and you are absolutely right. It does all of those things, and it's awful. But that's the only way you're going to come out of this, with a result that you want. And it sucks. You have to your life changes now. And when is it going to end? Is it going to end when your divorce is final? Nope. It's probably not going to end until, either somebody's just too poor or tired to do anything else in court, or your kids are no longer kids. And that's the way that it is.
I mean, and kids won't be able to afford schools. They won't be able to afford homes.
Nope.
And there's not going to be any accountability. Like I'm thinking in particular of 2 or 3 of our GALs or FOCs that just make these decisions based. They're imposing their own socioeconomic and religious views onto children, which is crazy. You're co-parenting with the government. And what you just said was so profound, per usual, in the sense, if that's what family court is doing, like the country's in real trouble.
Yeah, I remember the first time a judge threatened to take a child away from my client. This was, oh man, I guess it was probably Facebook when it was blowing up. So
Mhm.
22, 3 years ago. And at the time, I had created a Facebook account, and I had created a Facebook account because I had very young kids. And the sole purpose of that Facebook account was because I had, like, when my kids were born, I'd made a website with their name, and I made it to where the grandparents could come and we would just post pictures and stuff. And it just didn't work all that well. But for some reason, this is probably why Facebook took off. Even grandparents could get online and look at things in Facebook. They didn't have to click anything. It just sort of showed up. So I created
Yeah.
like a social media profile for the sole purposes of posting pictures of my kids. So my grandparents who were in different states and we didn't get to see personally very often at all because the closest one was maybe like 7.5 hours away could see the kids. And I remember sitting in court next to the client who had posted something, and I don't really think was being alleged that that was wrong, but the judge picked up on it. So I think that there was maybe a bruise that showed up on the child in a Facebook photo. And it was I sympathized with the client at the time because at a certain age, I just assumed that we were going to be, the kindergarten was going to send us to CPS because our kids were all so bruised because that's just what they do. They run into things, they play with their kids. But anyway, the other side made some allegations because the kid, she saw on my client's Facebook account, this kid had this bruise and was wondering what was going on. And the judge just focused on the fact that she put a picture of the child up and went off and started talking about her own experience and this and that. And that was the first time it occurred to me. It was like, oh, we are imposing our own views of parenting on kids when we get that deep into these kinds of things and threatening that if you post another picture, I'm taking your kids away, no questions asked. Basically, if I see this again, you're going to lose your parenting time. We're not even going to have a hearing about it just because that the judge just had strong feelings. Now, to be fair, that was the beginning of the social media revolution. A lot of people had strong feelings about it, and I'm not saying that they were necessarily wrong. But I also remember thinking, I don't have any personal issue with that. In fact, I'm doing it and probably had done it within 24 or 48 hours of posting pictures of my own kids so they could, could build that relationship with more distant relatives. And it just,
Yeah.
that blew me away. It was just like, holy shit, I hope you don't go on my account. I need to make that private so the judges don't see it because, what is that judge going to think of me?
And that is a brilliant example of the problems in family court when they bring their own stuff to the table. And that's what we see. And then you've got a GAL, an FOC, a custodial evaluator. Now, I certainly think, I thought about this a lot. I listened to one of our podcasts. Actually, I had a friend of a friend listen to one of the podcasts and ask a question about what you said. I think sometimes I add more nefarious intentions to people than I should. And I acknowledge that. But I do think custodial evaluations are more nefarious, really and truly. I genuinely do. That's my personal opinion. But I think that some of these FOCs and GALs, they really are trying to make the kids' lives better, but they're utilizing their own traumas from childhood and they are trying to impose that on them. And the reality is, in this country, you have a right to parent your children as you see fit, which is protected by the Constitution. And that's where you talk so much about the importance of law, and you are winning right now, ladies and gentlemen. There is a live poll. Hugh Barrow and I got into a massive fight at the last podcast. We have made up.
And I made a shameless pitch.
And there is a live poll, and you are winning right now.
Of course. Voice of reason.
I think the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so I do want to take a step back and try to give people positive intentions for what they're doing in family court, but just open up the dialogues to think, okay, the fact that your mom made you recite the rosary, maybe that didn't work out to you. But if you're talking to a child whose parents are religious, don't bring your own religious trauma to this kid, right?
It's funny. You talk about you sort of infer some bad intentions. I don't know that I would necessarily agree the bad intentions, but I read a lot more into those things, maybe even than you do, because, and you see it a lot with religion. You see outright condescension of people's faith in custodial evaluations. But one of the other things that you see is you can, especially when you work within a system like we did that had just a few custodial evaluators, so you got to see the same, reports from the same people, and you would see trends, and you would see them start talking about, man, there's been several different things, and maybe there's political discussions to be had about them, so I'm not going to get into what they are, but related to gender, related to certain things, and you'll see people that will read a study or attend something, and you'll hear them talking about it like at a CLE, and then you'll start seeing it in every single evaluation that they do. They'll start citing something, they'll start pushing hard on this versus that, and it completely, again, just like you said, if you are, the burden should be on the government to show that you are doing something that's harmful to your kids before restricting your right to parent your kids. And this is sort of an end run away from that for a system to impose its own ethics and morals, and it goes to a very, very fundamental right, and potentially, and one that touches on other fundamental rights. I mean, we see it affecting firearms. Firearms are a huge part of what you see in the court, where I've seen so many judges and so many people that are either GALs, FOCs, custodial evaluators make their point of view really clear about firearms and what's harmful to the kids and all of this stuff. And it affects another right. And I don't think there's any place for that, regardless of how I feel. And there have been times where I've agreed. There have been plenty of times where I've agreed, but thought it was an overreach. I mean, or where it's benefited my client, but I know that's a big overreach of the system from the judge or from whoever else is feeding information to the judge.
Absolutely. You see a lot of people imposing their religious beliefs, their political beliefs, and I couldn't have said it better, the condemnation of religion. I mean, there was that Court of Appeals opinion where there was an emergency motion essentially filed by a GAL or FOC. I can't recall which role that person was in at the time, but essentially saying during the pandemic, the kids were writing Bible verses down. And it was like, oh my God, we need to get mom evaluated. And it's, it's really dangerous. And this is what I say to people that become, and I don't like any of the C words other than the C word that I do love that everyone else hates, but conspiracy, corruption, or collusion, because I think you lose people when you say these words. But I understand
as opposed to the other one that you love.
I do. Yeah. I want to get a necklace that says it. Oh, I got a
Lord.
T-shirt on the way that I'm going to wear on the next podcast that you probably won't let me wear. I'll send it to you, but I digress. Okay. But it's a real problem. Like, it really is a problem. And I understand why people involved in the system think it is out to get them or to judge them for their own beliefs, because in this country, we have freedom of religion. We have 1 through 10 amendments. You know what I mean? It's like you can't impose your D or your R on these people's ability to parent.
Well, and lest we let the audience think that we believe it's a simple issue, I think that's a different line to walk, and I mean, a difficult line to walk in certain circumstances, because, and this is something that I encountered early in law school. It wasn't something I was not, when I was in law school, I was not interested so much in family law, but there was an ongoing debate in the state of Alabama, which was talked about a lot in the law school, about snake handling. I grew up in the deep South. I went to law school in the deep South. Snake handling was a big thing, whether or not that, if adults want to do that, that's freedom of their religion. If they want to put themselves in a dangerous situation, and people died from it, you heard about it every few weeks, somebody else dying in snake handling. And the big question was, if you want to raise your kids in a snake handling church, what is the state's role in getting involved in something where you have a pretty decent % chance that you might kill your kid? And that is not an easy question to answer. And I don't know where the law stands on it right now, but it was always evolving. So there are areas where you're going to, you can't argue that you're not talking about something that could definitely be harm to kids, but you're also touching on a protected right. And so these things are not always so black and white and so easy, but a lot of them are. I mean, a lot of them are just blatant personal views being imparted on, two people who are not related to you, that you were supposed to be looking at a relatively finite set of factors for best interest of child. No one asked you if you believe that, well, the one that I like to go back to, which I thought was the most horrible, and then the most recent that I encountered was the judge weighing how substantial the gifts to one of a pair of twins was versus the other. That was actually it was litigated, it's in pleadings, and it was a factor in determining someone's parenting time because of the perception that he gave something worth more money to one than the other. And that was one of the most appalling, petty things that I've ever seen in a court.
Yep. And, that case is one that traumatizes you. He's got 3 cases that traumatize him that he talks about
They
in one
had
point of reading.
so many things wrong with him.
There are
Yeah.
so many things wrong. And there are so many things with the government getting involved and like withholding things from kids. If a kid misbehaves and taking your cell phone, and I understand that there's interesting dynamics
yeah.
if you're co-parenting, but and another one, it's corporal punishment. I mean, we have Troxel, and I don't think obviously beating your children is not advised. Okay, duh. But I also think there's something to be said about, I'm gonna wear your ass out if you do it one more time. I mean, that was told to me, I don't think that's something that the court should be getting involved in.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I think after there's a line where it becomes harmful to a child. And I think that might be evolving, and which experts get to say where that line is. And I think that's one of the more difficult areas for a judge to look at. If you're balancing the best interest of the child versus a parent's fundamental right to parent their children. I think that's a good example of something that's hard. I mean, that's a hard one. Where is, and what if you say, okay, it's a small paddling, like what's the difference between this and that? And the judge is the one that has to weigh it. But I mean, that's why we have people to make those tough decisions. And that's why we want the best people in there to be able to weigh those things. But what we want is for them to actually weigh the legal rights and give them the proper amount of weight when making those decisions, and not get tied up. When I talk about the weighing of gifts between one child and the other, that's not unheard of for a litigant to bring up. We saw so many petty things brought up between the parties. So I don't mean to say, I still think it's horribly petty to bring up if you're a litigant, but it is not unheard of in a custody dispute for people to bring things like that up. What was awful was when it was seized upon by the court-appointed people and the judge just kept repeating it, and it became an integral part to that case. It just...
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, these things aren't always easy.
When I think there's so much power too in how lawyers can write things. Like I was talking to my parents about just one of the funny things that happened when I was a kid, and my mom flipped out, and I'm just thinking about it now. Oh my gosh, what I would have done. But if you had the right GAL and a teenage child that explained this in the teenage child's way, I can see where all kinds of crazy motions were filed. You know what I'm saying? And my mother's going to kill me when she listens to this. But one time, all of us in a van, my girlfriend and I, we were being loud and crazy, probably this. So preteens, and throwing something back and forth. My mother was like, y'all better blah, 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 blah. And she hit a mailbox in the subdivision, really right by our house.
Oh, I've driven in a car full of kids.
Mad.
I get it.
Yeah.
Get it.
Oh, I mean, she was just, if she could have spit nails, she would have. And she just, my girlfriend was at the time, she was so, oh my gosh, when there was 5 kids in the car. But I can see where you would go and be tell the GAL, mother acted erratically, yelling at children,
I
ran
could see
into
someone
a mailbox.
losing unsupervised parenting time for years based on that.
Yeah.
Years.
Yes. And I was explaining that to my mom, which obviously we needed to be yelled at. We were horse playing in the car, throwing something. You know what I mean? But I could see GALs, like you said, supervised parenting time, psychological evaluation for mom is erratic, and it was just basically we were misbehaving, acting like morons. And my mother said, shut your mouths, in the Catholic version of shut your mouths.
That's the Catholic version. Well, I mean, you often talk about why people, attorneys that are having these third party quote unquote experts appointed on cases. And what you just said was one of the few reasons that I would get someone involved. So, because I've had people involved in something happens, the other side is trying to make something out of it. But you always, as an attorney, when you're talking to your client and you know what really actually happened and you know the child will report correctly, but you cannot have your client talk to the kid about it in those terms or say what to say, because that will come out and it doesn't matter what happened to that point because your client's doing something wrong. Sometimes they need to go talk to someone. Now, if they have a therapist or a school counselor, someone they can speak with, that you can then, have as a witness and not have to get a third party long-term involved in the case, that would be ideal. But there were times where I would have a client who, example, sort of like you were saying, something happened when they were driving or something was said that was taken completely out of context and for a temporary period of time, which temporary can last, you see temporary sometimes intended to last a few weeks, but last years because things just keep getting continued and hearings can't be had. And that happened. And I had to get the child to talk to someone else for the real story to come out and for it to actually be cleared up. And that part of the system actually worked. But that was, just sometimes you get into that because people will try to make mountains out of molehills or misconstrue something that happened, to their advantage.
I completely agree, and I just think we're getting rid of those good people that do it, and I'm gonna say something controversial.
Yeah.
I get hate about this online. I do not have children, and I do not think that we should have regularly appointed GALs or FOCs that do not have kids.
Hmm.
And I get hate about it, but I just don't think that there's the understanding, especially you're talking about people, some of them that are regularly appointed,
Yeah.
started when they were in their 20s and early 30s. You have no fucking clue
Dude,
what life is about.
I can absolutely make a strong argument for and against that. I think I've seen cases where you have GALs that will see pictures of something that is clearly to a parent a diaper rash type situation that there is nothing in the world you could have done anything about. It has happened to every single parent. They understand what that is, and you have someone get hyperbolic about it and turn it into something else. There are so many bruises on kids. They become something more, and I'm just thinking, if that kid came to my house from your house at that age and didn't have bruises, I would think, what are you doing? Just sitting in front of the TV
Yeah.
all day?
Yeah.
It's just that understanding. At the same time, who is more likely to impose their own parenting style on kids that someone else's kids than someone who has parented and developed their own parenting style?
Brilliant argument. Let me caveat. I don't have a problem with them being appointed on the dependency, neglect, and abuse dockets as guardian ad litems, as those kind of things. But I'm talking about in circuit court cases dealing with a divorce or a custody action. I do think those are nuanced in a weird way, that there is a family dynamic. I'm not trying to say, and obviously if you want to cut this out, but I can't imagine that you haven't used a curse word in front of your children. Maybe you haven't. I don't know. But
My kids.
but
Oh, I probably shouldn't say on here the kind of things that they come out of their mouths. We gave up on that a long time ago. Yeah.
But so, my point is, in these custody actions in particular, I think it's fine on the dependency, neglect, and abuse docket, but there's not nearly as much money to be made. But I can think of three attorneys that regularly get appointed. I'll text you the names. I'm not mentioning them on this podcast. I don't care how much y'all Venmo me, but they don't have any business. They just don't have any business in addressing complex family dynamics that don't involve abuse allegations. You know what I mean? They make a mountain into a molehill. Like I'm seeing now GALs, FOCs ramping stuff up as opposed to de-escalating.
Oh,
But
no.
brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. But I will also say, from a practical point of view, if you want to be able to, FOCs and GALs, when they are actually responsive and when they're speaking to the parties in the case to the extent that they're allowed by the parties' attorneys, when they're having those communications, when they're transparent, when they talk about why they feel this way and all of that, the more you can actually relate and explain why you are feeling a certain way, the more likely it is that people are going to comply or they're going to work within that process. And I know from my clients that when they have someone that's telling them things about their kids and they don't have children, that is the first things my clients come in and say. You know what this person said? blah, blah, blah. And you know what? They don't have any kids. So how the hell would they know
Mhm.
that? So from a practical point of view, I think that is a barrier to having people be more cooperative within that process when you have people that don't have children telling people what to do with their kids.
So, all right, well, I just texted you 3 names. Look at it. I'm right, right? I mean, I wouldn't let those people make a decision about whether or not I take my dog to the vet.
No,
Am I
pull
wrong?
that up right now.
Also, can I wear that
Oh,
T-shirt on the podcast?
that is hilarious. Oh no, you should wear that. Absolutely. Oh,
Oh, I'm
I love
excited.
it. No. But you don't.
Ah,
That is going to cost you a veto of something I might wear. So just know. But I do love this
that's
t-shirt.
fair enough.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're
love
gonna
it.
start getting a little bit more political and disagreeing. And just because we disagree adamantly on things, that's the point.
Yeah,
Like
that's the
literally,
point.
that's the point is having these conversations. Everybody, no one actually gets mad. I think in this country, we're so afraid that if we're not carbon copies of one another
Oh yeah,
and we don't live in an echo chamber, then we're doing something wrong. So please
that's a
go
great point.
vote.
Yeah,
What?
that's a great point. Yes, great point.
And we can't get resolutions like exactly what Hugh just said about the fact who's more likely to impose their parenting style. That's a really great point that I never thought about. And I know I've said things about we need to be able to get full copies of Motion Hour. So our minds can be changed like about all kinds of things. And we
Yeah,
want you guys to get more up in the comments on YouTube.
and come on the
Guys,
show.
go on our YouTube.
Come on the
Yeah.
show. Change our minds. I mean, God knows we don't have the solutions to everything. We just want to. We want to. We want to make the process better by talking through the problems.
Yes, and I wanna be wrong. I want to believe the system is still savable, you know? And that's how we started this podcast, the fear of how we keep going. Again, we will have an update pretty soon on Judgy, the app, how this whole thing got started. Also, Judging the Judges, Judgy on YouTube. If you love us, go subscribe to our YouTube. For some reason, y'all love Apple Podcast, and we do too. But YouTube. Also, Kentucky Christine on all platforms. Hugh, you got any prolific, profound things to say?
Nope, I've left it all on the table. What can I say? Bye, guys. Peace.
We need some justice. My life is fine, justice.